Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when you catch this video. Just want to talk a little bit about our loyalty. And I was talking to one of my sisters and told her about me thinking about doing this video, and she said, "Why don't you title it The Democratic Diss Track?" And I have sisters that vote for Democrats. I have sisters that vote for Republicans. I have sisters that don't get involved. So, and that doesn't stop me from loving them. But, we have to wonder why we're so loyal to our abusers. Yeah, the Republican Party wasn't even a thing until 1854. So what party of people owned slaves? When blacks came out of slavery and started voting Republican, which party redistricted the lines to change the voting patterns of blacks? Which party would not even allow blacks to run as a candidate on their ticket until 1934? Which party was behind the lynching of blacks and white Republicans who actually stood with blacks? Which party created the KKK? Which party created the black codes? Which party put the grandfather clause in place which said you could only vote if your grandfather had voted? Which party created something called convict leasing, which actually imprisoned blacks on false charges so their buddies who actually owned plantations and companies could actually get the slave labor back for free? Which party refused to side with Republicans and independents when they tried to put anti-lynching laws in place? Which party actually stripped the voting rights of blacks in the first place? Which party was against Brown versus Board? Which party put the Southern Manifesto in place? Which party voted against Eisenhower's 1957 and 1960 civil rights bills? All of these things were done by Democrats. It's really sickening to hear black folks say Democrats gave us back our right to vote in 1965 when it was Democrats who stripped our right to vote in the first place. It's like Obama actually stripped funding for HBCUs in his first budget as president. In his budget the following year, he gave it back to him, and then he got held as a savior for doing it. I mean, come on, we got to think better than this. And we got to ask, who totally stripped Eisenhower's bills down to nothing and then signed a watered-down version into law in 1964? Who took out the voting rights portion of Eisenhower's bills and then gave us a separate voting rights bill in 1965, as he had done now two things for us? That was LBJ, our white Moses, our savior. How have we been voting since that fateful day in 1964? What has the party we vote for to the tune of over 90% on a consistent basis since 1964, what have they delivered? Who went to various presidents to have them make crack sentences longer and stronger than cocaine sentencing? That was a Congressional Black Caucus. What party do all of these members belong to? Democrats. Who wrote the 1994 crime bill? That was Joe Biden, and it was signed by Bill Clinton. Clinton only backtracked on that bill in 2016 when Hillary was running for the presidency against Donald Trump. And now Joe Biden is trying to backtrack to a degree because he said he's not ashamed of the law at all. And so, I mean, are we really that simple-minded? I mean, because the Democrats think we are. But the crazy thing is now, Democrats did all these things to lock up more and more people in our communities. And guess who we now blame for the exorbitant amounts of black men in prison? We blame the Republicans. What do Republicans control in black or brown communities? When was the last time you saw a Republican voted in within a black community? What has the party we give over 90% of our vote to deliver to us other than feel-good, empty promises. For 56 years, almost 57, have we seen any improvement in a black community anywhere in this country? Who told you to stop your bitching and moaning because they fight for you to get food stamps? That was a Democratic black congresswoman named Marcia Fudge. Who told you to stop complaining? Put your work shoes on, get a job and go to work. In essence, y'all stop being lazy as black folks. Who told you that there was no need to give blacks reparations because now you had access to better education and opportunities? Who was also the same person that gave Holocaust descendants another round of reparations before he left office because he said it wasn't fair that they had to struggle. But he wouldn't even put it on the table for black folks with reparations. And that was your Messiah, like Louis Farrakhan said, Barack Obama. Who actually initiated the paperwork for those Holocaust survivors to get reparations? Well, it's the same person that just said blacks are not diverse, with the exception of a few, Joe Biden. Yet, we still manage to give these people our support year in and year out. Now, before you get unhinged, did you ever once hear me say vote for the other side? Amazingly, we have allowed the people who have done nothing for us convince us that the other side doesn't care about us. To be clear, once again, I never said you had to vote Republican. You do know you can vote third party, don't you? I am a firm believer in the true wasted vote is to vote for someone just because you don't like the other guy or the other party, and you've been trained where to park your vote. You've been trained not to even think about who to vote for. I remember the movie Distinguished Gentleman. The congressman had died, the original congressman, the incumbent. And he died, and Eddie Murphy was playing the party. The guy's name was Jeff Johnson that had died. And Eddie Murphy's name was Jefferson. And he just shortened it to Jeff and ran under the name. And a couple went to the poll, and the wife asked the husband, who do we always vote for? That's black people. We don't even think about where a candidate stands as long as there's a D next to their name. I mean, that's really sad. And we have a major disconnect in our race when it comes to politics. You know, it's like a man and woman being married for almost 60 years. And I use this analogy in my book, But Hey, What Do I Know? Available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. But it's like a man and a woman being married for almost 60 years. And the wife will not cook. She won't clean. She won't go out to dinner with him when he asks her on a date. She won't have sex with him. And because he's loyal to her, he stays married. But every day he goes across the street to his female neighbor and asks her to perform wifely duties. She's within her rights to tell him go to hell. And this is, unfortunately, our stance on politics and parties. We've been married to the Democratic Party for 56 years, and we have nothing to show for it except a lot of black politicians. So in essence, we are married to Democrats, but we keep expecting Republicans to perform wifely duties. Did you know that LBJ actually told our civil rights champions that he wanted them to manage the grassroots blacks for the system, and there was actually no place for grassroots blacks in any decision-making capacity? Did you know that? Whether you're a Malcolm X fan or not, he warned us against those civil rights leaders. We have been conditioned that Barry Goldwater was against us for the stance he took on the 64 bill. And because I had been conditioned all those years, I bought some books about Barry Goldwater. And I found out that Barry Goldwater had actually been a champion for black folks up until that bill. Barry Goldwater himself said that LBJ had did some things, had stripped some things out of there and put some stuff in that was not constitutional. And he said there was no way, because Barry Goldwater was a strict constitutionalist. And Barry Goldwater said if the Supreme Court determines that what LBJ did was constitutional, I will support it. And Barry Goldwater said, I know because of my position, it's going to cost me in the election. Barry Goldwater said, he said, if that bill was signed in its current form that LBJ had created, he said, in no time, we were going to have a police state in this country. And that's exactly what we have, especially in the black community. Barry Goldwater prophesied that in 1964. And what are we complaining about right today? The police state against black men and women. But Barry Goldwater has been ostracized by Democrats and Republicans because none of them stood by the Constitution like he did. And he's been dead since 1991. And his words are in our face right today. And I mean, speaking of that, I mean, right now, you know, we, in this climate in the country, we want to blame Trump for everything. And, you know, we're talking about the attacks against blacks have increased since he's been in office. Well, in reality, right before I started recording this, because I like to research stuff, I researched how many unarmed blacks have been killed by police since Trump has been in office. He has 4 months left in his presidency. And so far, only 19 blacks have been killed, unarmed blacks have been killed by police since Donald Trump has been in office. Now, compare that to Obama's 2 terms. Obama's first term, in that 4-year period, 48 unarmed blacks were killed by cops. In his second term, 41 blacks were killed, 41 unarmed blacks were killed by cops. Now, with 4 months left in Donald Trump's presidency, do you realize to catch up with Obama, about 5 more blacks per month would have to be killed by police just to catch up with the low number that Obama had in 41 in the second term, 41? Do you realize that? But we want to sit here and blame white America and Trump and all that, but Obama administration did nothing with these incidents going on. I mean, he came out and said, you know, Trayvon Martin could be his son, but other than that, he didn't put anything in place to slow down those incidents or punish those cops. But we want to sit there and blame Trump for everything. And I'm not a Trump fan, but I'm just telling you, I like to look at things objectively. And unfortunately, most of us can't because we're too emotional in the way we think. I mean, so did Barry Goldwater lie? He told us what was going to happen. And here we are living it. In 1984, Joe Biden and Strom Thurmond spearheaded a law called the Comprehensive Control Act, which actually expanded drug trafficking penalties and federal civil asset forfeiture. And that allows police to seize and absorb your property, whether it's cash, cars, guns, or anything else, without even proving you guilty of the crime, of any crime. And when the police confiscate your stuff, they get up to 80% of the value of what they seize for their departments. So it actually creates incentive for them to take your stuff. In 1986, another law sponsored by Joe Biden, partially, Anti-Drug Abuse Act. And that increased penalties for drug crimes. It was then that the first incident of disparity between your crack and cocaine sentences took place. And, you know, when we think about it, cocaine is done by non-black communities, crack is done in black communities. So what that law put in place, it said a person, if they were to get arrested for cocaine versus somebody getting arrested for crack, the person in possession of the cocaine would have to have 100 times the amount of cocaine to be get the same sentence for crack. But y'all ready to run to the polls and vote for them right now. 1988 Anti-Drug Abuse Act, co-sponsored by Joe Biden. It strengthened prison sentences for drug possession. It increased penalties for transporting drugs. And that's when it was, the Office of the National Drug Control Policy was created. And don't get me wrong, I believe people that commit crimes need to go to prison. No, I'm not saying they should. But it's amazing that we can even justify our decision to go vote for this dude or any Democrat. But the only time we want to talk about drug disparity, though, is when we want to ostracize Oliver North and Ronald Reagan, who were Republicans. And I mean, they did some bad stuff too. But we didn't vote for either one of them. So you don't even talking about it. And if you really want to see who's behind, who really pushed the effort, you need to check out the video on this channel on who's responsible for black incarceration. In Biden 2008 presidential campaign website, his campaign actually called the 1994 law the Biden crime law. And it said they encourage states to effectively increase their prison sentences by paying them to build more prisons. Which means if you build more prisons, you need to lock more people up. Now, if you pay attention, Biden is quick to defend his 1994 law by saying that the incarceration rates increased at the state level. Which is true. But what he didn't say was that the more prisons they built and the more people they locked up, they would receive more federal funding. Especially if they locked up more black people. Now, never take my word on anything. Do your own research. And in the 1994 law, there was a actually increase in spending for something called burn grants. And in the year 2014, the burn grants actually rewarded police departments for making as many drug arrests as possible. This guy named Neil Franklin, he's a retired police major out of Maryland. And he said this created a perverse incentive for cops to focus on poor black communities. And one of the requirements for completing a federal grant application for funds to combat drugs was showing how many drug arrests they made, according to Mr. Franklin. The thinking was that the more drug arrests you have, the more significant your drug problem. If you have a significant drug problem, the federal government will give you more funds. And Mr. Franklin said, so what did we do? We had our officers go out and make as many drug arrests as they could. Where did we do that? We did that in communities of color. Now, folks, this is Joe Biden's legislation. This was not Trump's legislation, the person you have been conditioned to hate. I've heard that criminals should be locked up by black folks who know no other alternative than voting for a Democrat. And I agree. Criminals should be locked up. However, had the legislation, the same exact legislation, been written or passed by a Republican, we will be screaming racism from the top of the roof to everybody who listens. The problem is nobody takes us serious. I mean, hell, I don't even take black folks serious when it comes to politics. We're the only group of people who vote against our own interests. As I stated earlier, the only thing we've seen more of since 1964 politicians, black politicians, and nothing else that moves in a positive direction. And increase in black politicians ain't in moving in a positive direction. That's actually, every time you elect another black politician, we take another step backwards. And I'm not saying white politicians are the answer either, but we need to stop focusing so much on politics and start focusing on economics. That's how you control politicians, not the other way around. You ain't controlling nothing. You know, you ain't controlling not one politician when you don't have no money. So that was even a bill, a civil rights bill done by Republicans in 1991. But we hardly heard anything about it. Research it yourself. And one of the things I keep hearing is Trump is a racist. So, okay, let's go with that. So we're willing to run to the polls in November to try and vote out a racist, to cast our vote for a guy who's an open racist, and all of his legislation proves it. I mean, he almost sounded like George Wallace when he wrote that stuff in '76 about he didn't want white kids to be attending the same school as black kids. That sounds like George Wallace saying segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. That's exactly what that sounds like to me. So he's a Democrat. So their racism is okay with us. Just as it was in the days of LBJ, whom I've talked to with other blacks who said it was okay because calling black folks nigger was just how Texas white boys talked. Trump hasn't passed any legislation that has been directed toward blacks that has been harmful or detrimental. Not one. He even made funding for HBCUs permanent. And I even heard blacks say, well, he only did that because I think at the time he did it, that might have been doing impeachment. Let me take that back. He didn't do it doing impeachment. He actually did it before the impeachment stuff came into fruition. And black folks said he only did it because of the impeachment process. No, it was already signed and dated and done before impeachment ever started. So it had nothing to do with impeachment and trying to win over blacks. What we don't understand is the reason Trump is winning among blacks is because you got some blacks that have come off the Democratic plantation because they tired of being talked to like little children. They're tired of being lied to by Democrats. That's why blacks are voting for Trump. It's not saying they like Trump, but they're tired of the lies from the Democrats, and that's what we need to understand. So he ain't passed no legislation that's been harmful to us. We said a few years ago we didn't want business as usual anymore when it came to politics. So you got someone in the office right now who's outside of the system, and now we're crying because he talks tough and he doesn't make us feel good. We like politicians to make us feel good. That reminds me of Halle Berry in Monsters Ball when she was talking to Billy Bob Thornton. If you listened earlier, you heard the legislation that Biden authored and co-authored. I mean, how blind can we be? The problem is we don't like our illusions shattered when it comes to people we love, even if they don't love us back. And when I think about that, I'm going to have to go listen to Luther Vandross. She loves me back. We've been conditioned to love our oppressors in the Democratic Party. But miraculously, the Democrats have convinced us that the Republicans are the group holding us back. I read something years ago by a black guy. And he said, black people are the most conservative people on the planet until election time. And it is then that we become socialists. Did I say vote for Trump? You never heard me say that. But I see many blacks complain about his morality. Ironically, these same blacks said we were not electing a preacher when Obama's morality was questioned. A black representative was voted out early this year in Tennessee by a vote of 41 to 18. He was voted out of the Democratic Party because he said abortion was wrong, and he supports school vouchers that said if your kid lives near an underperforming school in a black community, that money should follow that kid and that we should allow that parent to send that kid to a better school. And the Democrats in the party with him voted him out because they said that's not what we stand for. So you want to talk about Democrats care about black people, but those two legislations that they support hurt black people. They support abortion, which hurts black people. They don't support school vouchers that could help black people, but ironically, they make sure all their kids go to good schools or private schools. So you need to think about that. And for some reason, we keep thinking these folks care about us. Most blacks think because I talk a lot about Democrats that it automatically makes me a Republican. First of all, that shows your limited thinking. Secondly, we don't vote for Republicans, so why should I waste time with you talking about them? Let's open your eyes to the people you support first. And once we do that, then we can sit down and talk about Republicans together. I'd enjoy the conversation. Until then, I will keep talking about Democrats. I have voted for Democrats because I was taught and conditioned to do so. I have voted for Republicans because as I started studying things, I saw some different policies that actually favored us as black people. I have voted for independents because I got fed up with both parties. And I have even written myself in. So I'm not beholden to either party. I learned that from my high school principal, who was a black guy in a predominantly black school. But you know why we don't like our voting decision criticized? Because in reality, we are unsure of it ourselves. Sure, you don't make the final decisions in policy making, but you are responsible for the decisions your lawmakers make by the mere fact that you cast a vote for that person. And since we don't like our decisions questioned, we're going to do whatever we can to protect our decision. In chapter 7 of my book, But Hey, What Do I Know, at Amazon and Barnes & Noble, I break down the politics of many of our beloved Democrats. If a black Democrat says something, in our minds, it's automatically considered credible. If a black Republican says the same thing, he or she is considered just a mouthpiece for the party and has no clue what they're talking about. We are quick to forgive our abusers in the Democratic Party. And we are also quick to criticize the people who do nothing to us in the Republican Party. And as a side note, as I close out here, I also criticize Republicans. But for black folks, they only hear what they want to.